Hello there and welcome back to The Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another video from the vault. That's right, we're dipping back into the Patreon archive of videos today because as you're watching this, current me is probably frazzled beyond even me now. I'm speaking to you from the past and this video will be from the past, but in the current timeline, I am probably packing or unpacking or goodness knows what. So thank you to my patrons for letting me share these videos here on the channel because otherwise I just wouldn't have made it this year. But I'm glad I have a very classic 1940s style to share with you all today. Let's go ahead and dive back in time. Today I'm going to go ahead and try and replicate this pattern using my basic block and making changes to that as usual. So let's jump on over to the blue patterning table of doom and I'll show you how I would go about recreating this 40s dress. Alright, here we are above the blue patterning table of doom, of course, with my basic block regular bodice pattern. So this is the dress I'll be recreating today. Of course, I'm not sure exactly how this dress went together because I don't actually own this pattern. I'm just looking at it on Pinterest, on Etsy, wherever I can find images of this particular McCall's pattern. 6713 from McCall. I believe this is 1945, 1946. Maybe 46. I'll put it on the screen. But here is the drawing of view B here from the back. As you can see, they have a small short closure at the neck, and then I'm not even sure how the rest of the dress closes, honestly, just because I can't really see it on the pattern. I didn't investigate too terribly, let's be honest, because I'm just going to put a center back zipper into this dress because it is me. That's right. And I always put center back zippers into all the things I make. So to start out to make this, however, I'm going to go ahead and trace a copy of my front bodice block pattern. Always beginning from the blocks, and you can transform them into anything. And today we're going to transform this one into this dress. So here I am tracing a copy of this. I'm actually going to trace a full copy of my front pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and mirror this, well, after I transfer my dart markings on as well, but go ahead and mirror that along the center front and trace the other side as well. So I have a full front here to work from because we're doing this asymmetric design today. We will need the full front. All right, again, just marking my dart points here, and I will go ahead and draw in my darts with blue marker here. I've got the dart points and the apex marked from the block pattern onto this alphanumeric version here. Okay, and then with red here, I'm going to go ahead and extend one of the dart points for each dart all the way to the apex. So I'm just using a red marker for that. You probably can't tell the different colors of the marker unless you have this on the big screen, which some people do watch me on the big screen, and it does intimidate me a little bit, honestly. All right, so now I have my darts drawn in as they come from straight off the block pattern. I'm going to go ahead and cut out this so I can do some dart manipulation here. I do get sidetracked once I get over here to the neckline because I start to think, do I want to modify the neckline before I cut this out? Sure. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in a basically as shallow of a V as I can while keeping this still straight across. So I'm just drawing in a V neckline here and doing the same exact V on the other side here. The reason I want this to be a very straight off V is because we will be doing a self-facing on the front of this dress today, which is something I've never done before, so that should be fun. But I'm going to continue cutting this out now that I have a V neckline. So just keep cutting. I hope all of you are having a good holiday week here so far. It's the week of Christmas here in the United States. As I've said before, I don't really celebrate, or my family doesn't really celebrate Christmas in any sort of religious sense, just more as a secular holiday. It's a sort of American holiday, so that is what my family celebrates, very casually in our household. So we're just planning on having some Italian for dinner that night, as my family is Italian-ish, mostly American, but no one speaks Italian. It's very many generations removed. The only really Italian thing we keep is having Italian food on Christmas, honestly. So now I'm going to move these side darts to a more angled position now that I've been sidetracked and being tangenting about Christmas for a while. But I'm going to go ahead and move these darts. I'm going to keep the side dart. I'm just going to make it a more angled one. So it's going to point down from here near the waist up towards the apex. So I've just drawn that in the same on each side. Again, I've just chosen a spot. There was nothing special about where I drew that in with the green. I just chose something that looked similar to the pattern image. So I'll cut along the original dart leg down to the apex, and then cut up this green line to the apex where I want my new dart to be, like so. And then I will close the original dart, and that will open up the new one. Dart manipulation, you see me do it all the time. This is called the slashing and spreading dart manipulation technique. Cut off this excess here as well. Goodbye. And now we have our new dart over here. Let's do the same on this side as well. So again, just cutting to the apex, but not all the way through it. And then you can hinge that closed, like so. And now you've kept the side dart, but it is in a new position. And I can go ahead and fill this in with some scrap paper that I have laying around here. So go ahead and tape that into these new open spaces here. The new darts. I'm going to go ahead and mark out 1.25 inches from my darts, or from my apex, to become my new dart point, and then connect that to the new dart legs, basically. Sometimes I forget to film this step where I move the dart point out at least 1.25 inches is usually my standard for me. I think the recommendation is 5/8 of an inch, but for me and my bust size, I just find 1.25 inches away from the apex is best for me and my dart points. So that's how far I come down into the center of the new dart, basically. Again, I'll tape this side in and do the same over here. But yeah, one of our only Christmas traditions is to have Italian food on Christmas night here in my household. We usually try and there's an Italian like delicacies and meat market near, or like in Denver, there's a couple of them, and they have like well, not homemade, but like practically homemade Italian desserts, and so we usually try and get cannolis from there. We should just learn to make cannolis, honestly, but that would be advanced for us. Here I am folding my darts closed and cutting off the excess. Sharp-eyed viewers will notice I'm doing this opposite of how I'm supposed to. I'm folding the dart fullness up, and I'm supposed to be folding the dart fullness down. This is something I will discover, or past me will discover in a little while here, and you'll see me frustratingly correct this mistake. Alright, so now our darts are positioned more like the vintage pattern, with them angled down. And of course, I need to separate this sort of yoke section off up here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that in, essentially here. It is almost parallel with this new dart, this whole section up here, this like separate shoulder section. It's about 1.5 to 2 inches above the apex, it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and try and do that as well. I have a regular wooden pencil here to be able to sketch in this line. Originally I make it quite curved here, and you'll see I decide to change my mind. But I'm really just sketching in what I think will look best, what will look most similar to the pattern I'm basing this off of. The only other Christmas Day tradition we have in my family is to have a big brunch breakfast in the morning. So, well, in the nearly the afternoon. At around noon, we have a big brunch breakfast. I'm noticing here that this line on the actual pattern here actually almost curves the other direction. I think part of this is just the illusion that is created once this gets onto the body, but I will straighten this one off a little bit here now that I see exactly what it's supposed to look like. So I'm kind of thinking, all right, come down from the V in almost a straight line, and I'm just straightening off that curve I had originally drawn just a bit. But I am looking forward to my Prosecco brunch on Christmas. I actually ended up making myself like a full American breakfast the other day just because I saw a picture of one, and I was like, man, I haven't had pancakes and eggs and the fixins for a while, and so I made breakfast for one the other day just for myself. For those of you who know what IHOP is, I don't know if they're outside of America. I think they're probably just in America. I kind of wanted like an IHOP breakfast, but homemade, so I went ahead and made like a full breakfast for lunch the other day. And it was the first time I'd ever made pancakes, actually, which I don't think I did a very good job, but, you know, room for improvement. So now I've drawn in with purple here the actual line I want to cut here. Again, this is all just arbitrary. You decide where you want this style line to be and what you want it to look like, honestly. You could have a straight line coming down from here. You could have it curve one way, curve the other way. Whatever you want to do. Really, there's no reason to do this other than if you were going to have it be contrast. You can see here in the pattern image, there's the blue and black version where they did do a contrast fabric on this section. But for today, I will be doing the same fabric. So there's really no reason for me to put this style line here other than just for giggles, you know? Now, because I've created that style line and cut into the main body of the pattern, I do need to attach seam allowance to both sides of that new style line. So here I am just taping on scraps of paper and drawing on a 1/2 inch seam allowance onto the yoke piece-ish here. So just go ahead and attach seam allowance along there. And then I will also need to put seam allowance along the main body of the front here as well. So just taping on scraps of paper so that I can create a 1/2 inch seam allowance along where it was cut apart, basically. Once it's cut apart, it will need seam allowance in order to go back together. These are the rules of pattern making. And here at the front, I only need seam allowance up to the center front where that piece will be sewn back on. So I'm ending the seam allowance at the center front, and we'll be doing some more stuff over there in that area later. So I'm just going to leave it like this for now. Now we've already modified darts and separated a yoke off, but we're not done with this bodice front. I'm going to go ahead and label this one bodice front A, and I will label the little yoke cutoff piece bodice front B. Here I am just marking the grain lines as well here, just so that I can maintain the proper grain line when I cut these out of fabric later. I just want to make sure that I have that marked on both pieces. Because normally, of course, my front gets cut on the fold along the straight grain, but with this, it will be cut. I only need one of each of these pieces, so I will be cutting it kind of free form, and I need to know what my grain line will be. Now, of course, this pattern that we're working from doesn't have waist darts. It has gathering up on the shoulder. So I'm going to close both of these waist darts up into this shoulder, or open them up into the shoulder, rather. So I'm going to draw from this apex up into the shoulder seam, like so, about an inch and a half away from the neckline, and then from this apex here on the right up again into the shoulder seam as well. And then just like we normally slash and spread darts, I will go ahead and close the waist darts and open them up there into the shoulder. And then you could use these as darts up there, you could use them as like sort of pleats, but today I'll be using them as gathering, just gathering that extra fullness that we're moving up there now. This is why you need to cut a full front also as well, because you're creating quite an asymmetric design if you're doing this one. Cutting down from my green lines again, just to the apex, but not all the way through, so I can have that hinge ability when doing slashing and spreading. So we did some dart manipulation, we created a new style line and yoke, and now we're doing more dart manipulation. So a few extra steps to create this pattern. Alright, now we can close both waist darts like so, just layering the dart legs together to close them, and we can go ahead and tape that shut. And you can see how that opens up that same amount of fullness up into the shoulder seam instead. Like so. Same over here. Go ahead and close this one. And now our pattern piece is looking rather strange. I think we can all agree. Mine is like even more strange looking than perhaps a normal one would be, because I have my full bust adjustment on my pattern, so my darts are very large, and so when I move them, they're still very large up there into the shoulder. So my piece looks a little bit different than the images show on the back of the pattern for this vintage pattern, but that's because I doubt the vintage pattern has a full bust adjustment, whereas mine does. Now, of course, I need to fill in all this fullness up here, so I'll go ahead and tape some extra paper in up here. Alright, once that is all filled in, I can go ahead and straighten off these darts and get a look at what we have going on up here. So I have this kind of jagged line up here, and you really do want to just smooth all this out. So I take another scrap of paper here and fill in this little bit in the center, actually, just so I have room to add a subtle curve up here and just smooth this jaggedy line that is now our shoulder seam out. So again, try and find my sketchy pencil. I'm going to slice off a little bit right here at the neckline almost, and then come out a little bit here. So anywhere from an 1/8 of an inch to a 1/4 of an inch of difference along this area, but it will all work out in the end, especially in a floopy fabric like we'll be using today. Again, technical term, floopy fabric. Well, there'll be a lot of complaining about the fabric today. I'm so sorry. Alright, so now our pattern piece looks like so. Very wonkily shaped. Cut off a little bit more excess, tape down anything that's being annoying here. And so we have this, and this will be gathered down, so it'll look like a bodice again. So basically this whole top area that we just added the fullness to needs to gather down to meet the back shoulder, as well as match the other side of the shoulder, which is about 4 and I think 1/4 of an inch. Let's just measure here. It's actually 5 1/4, I think. Something like that. I write it here 4 1/4, but I think it's 5. It won't matter in the end. I'll be gathering it down to match the back, and there will be no messing it up then. So you'll see what I mean when I'm sewing it. But this will get gathered down to match the other side. And alas, this is what the front looks like. But of course, I have this V neckline up here, and I was saying that today we were going to try and do a self-facing on this. Instead of having a separate facing piece, the facings will be drafted onto these pieces, and then we'll just fold over as opposed to being sewn on. So let's go ahead and try that. All right, so here on the little yoke piece, I'm just going to go ahead and tape on some extra paper where a facing would normally be sewn on, perhaps. And then I can go ahead and fold that along here where it will be folded eventually. And then I will cut off, we'll mark and cut off the excess here. So just slice off the excess and you have basically a facing here. Of course, I don't need my facing to be quite this wide, so I'm going to lower this down. Normally I make my facings 2.5 inches wide, but of course that other ½ inch is eaten up by the seam allowance, so really they're about 2 inches wide once finished. I end up making this one 2.25. I don't know, I just kind of decided upon that randomly. I didn't have a particular reason to do so. I wasn't sure if I was going to have this edge be serged or have to turn it twice and finish it, so I guess that was part of the reason I was like, I still want a little bit of extra room. No? Maybe? Kind of? So here we go. Here is my self-facing drafted onto this piece now, which looks like this. And I got the idea to do this, of course, from looking at studying this vintage pattern. Seemed to have this finish along their neckline, so I wanted to go ahead and give it a try as well. So on this front piece, again, I'm going to tape on more excess paper where our V-neck needs to be. Again, where that seam allowance ends is the center front of this, weirdly enough. So again, imagining that this gets folded along here, what kind of shaped facing do I want on the back? Is what I'm thinking here. Again, I will just cut off the excess along the shoulder seam here. Like so. And then I was trying to figure out and decide what shape this needs to be on the inside. So for starters, I knew I wanted it to be 2.25 wide, so let's start there. So from the fold line, I'm adding 2.25. That's how wide I want my facing to be, but now I'm like, what do I, how do I want to? Who knows? I've never done it this way before. Let's go ahead and cut off the excess to start with. But how long do I need to make this into that area? I wanted it to be about 2.5 inches past the center point of the V neckline, basically. So I was trying to think my way through this here. Sometimes I like to just test things, and that helps my brain function. So here I am thinking, okay, if this is sewn here, and this gets folded down, this will be like so. And I'm walking the seam here a little bit. This gets sewn all along here. Let's see, walk that along. Yeah, And then so that'll be folded over. Really, you can leave this as long as I have it now, but I just end up straightening it off a little bit. So it's about 2.5 inches down from that original place where my seam allowance ended. I decided to just straighten this off, and you'll see what the shape this results in a moment here. All right, so here we have bodice front A and bodice front B with facings, dart manipulation. The gathering is added, the yoke is made, lots of stuff going on here. It's 20 minutes just for one pattern piece, honestly. Or 2 pattern pieces, really. All right, so there's our bodice front. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and cut this out of muslin because I wanted to test this out and see if it worked. Because I hadn't made anything with this much going on in a while. I wanted to make sure I wasn't leading all of you astray. So here I am cutting it out of a lightweight muslin that I had here in my stash. And I will set these 2 pieces aside for now while I work on the rest of the pattern, and then I will test this out before I cut it out of my real fabric for today. Okay, so for the skirt for this dress, I'm going to be using an A-line skirt as my base here, but the A-line skirt is just created by taking the basic block skirt and closing the waist darts, opening them up into fullness at the hem. So here's my skirt front. This is going to be the underlayer, and then I need to create the overlayer for this skirt because as you can see here on the pattern illustration, there's like a skirt underneath, and then there's this over faux wrapped layer with gathering and this little geometric drape that falls down that's longer than the rest of the hem. You can see here on the left hand side that scarf-like drape that dips past the hem. So we're going to create this pattern piece here. And the reason I knew how to do so was to look again at the little illustration of the pattern pieces from the back of this vintage pattern. And you can see here on the bottom right hand side of this, it says left skirt front. This is of course not the most high quality image because I just pulled this off of someone's Etsy listing for this pattern. But you can see right skirt front is just a basic A-line skirt pattern. Left skirt front is this strangely angled shaped extended skirt pattern. So the right hand side of that looks like an A-line skirt pattern and the left hand side has this geometric extension. So I'm taking one half of a A-line skirt pattern here and I'm lining the center front up with some more paper so we can go ahead and create a pattern that is roughly this shape, I guess. So as you can see, this left skirt front, one half of it looks like an A-line skirt pattern, which is what I have here, and then the rest of it is squared off. So from down here at the hem of this A-line skirt, I'm lining up my ruler with the center front, and I'm going to go ahead and draw a straight hem out from here. So of course the A-line skirt is a curved hem, but on this side, because I want it to dip down below the rest of the hem like the pattern image, I'm just going ahead and straightening this off. A lot of this is just like kind of my technique when it comes to copying vintage patterns without owning them. I never buy, I mean, you've all seen me on my channel, I've used a vintage pattern just once, and that was to make trousers because I don't like doing them from scratch. But I'm looking at the back envelope here, and I'm just trying to copy the shape of this pattern piece using my own patterns as a base. So it seems to have this little kind of weird like bite out of the top of it, this little curved edge. So I'm just drawing that on to my version here as well. Theirs also seems to have a self-facing on it. I'm going to add just an inch of fold over so I can hem the edge of this because it does hang free. And so it'll turn and move around as I walk, so I just want to have a hemmed edge on that side. But I'm just, you know, guessing, honestly. I mean, it works, so I guess I'm making an educated guess, we could say, on how to make this dress without owning the pattern. Just making the pattern using my patterns as a base. Now again, to create this angled shape that the vintage pattern has over here, I'm just looking at this pattern piece, and it looks like from about halfway down the skirt, it angles up to the top waist, and then from then it straightens off to the hem. Again, this is help creating that little handkerchief hanging bit on the other side. So at about a right angle from the curve I have at the waist, which is again not very official, but just a shallow curve up there, I'm drawing an angled line down to about halfway down to the hem. Nope, people are walking above us, I do apologize. And then I will go ahead and draw this parallel to the center front down to the hem over here, like so. So again, just copying the vintage pattern piece. I sound like a broken record, alas. Do forgive me. And here I'm just futzing with this line, by the way. It's all fine. The way I drew it the first time would have worked. The way I fix it works. It's fine. Anyway, here's how our pattern piece is looking. Again, we're trying to make it look like this in the end. This squared off side down here on the left is what creates this handkerchief bit, the scarf-like fall over here. So again, just copying that pattern piece from the pattern back as best I can, and hoping it will come out to look like the finished dress is supposed to, I suppose. So now we have our skirt front, regular A-line skirt front, and then our additional drape on top. So there's those two. Set that aside for now. Again, that regular skirt front I will just cut along the fold as usual, and then the big skirt drape I'll need to cut one of, so I can cut that on a single layer of fabric. And we have our bodice front as well, but we need to start doing the back of this dress. I'm kind of disjointed and out of order here today, so hopefully you're following along. So I've grabbed some more paper here so I can trace my bodice block back. I'm not making very many, if any, modifications to this. This is already very similar to our vintage pattern, so just drawing in my seam allowance over here where my zip is. This is the back. I have my normal dart where I normally have it. And actually you can see a tiny bit raised the center back neckline. A tiny bit. That's the only modification I made to my block pattern. Otherwise, this is just a direct tracing of my back block pattern. Alright, so I can set that aside. And then I need a back skirt pattern. I would just use my A-line skirt back, but I think it got put into one of the other folders, or one of the other envelopes with another pattern. It seems to have disappeared down here, so I'm just going to go ahead and quickly make another one. And to do so, I will show you how you can make a pattern like this without, or do dart manipulation without actually having to slash and spread. So I'm going to do this in a different method here. I just think this is a little bit harder for beginners to understand if you don't already know how pattern manipulation and dart manipulation works. So I don't usually do it this way on the channel, but seeing as we have a little bit of extra time here with one another, I will go ahead and show you how to do this in a different way. So here's my pencil skirt back, my basic block skirt back. I'm going to go ahead and start out by tracing the center back line here. This is actually with seam allowance, as you can see here, but same difference. Also, you may notice that my hair is in a French braid here, which, wow, my hair's long enough to do that, huh? All right, so from the center back, I'm going to go draw this line along the top up to the first dart point. I'll actually draw in these dart points, or dart legs, so you can see them. So I've drawn the waistline to that first dart leg. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab my pencil, and I'm going to hold it at the dart point down here. So hold this down here, and then I'm going to swing the dart closed up there. So I've gone from one dart leg to the other up there, and just swinging that from the dart point. Now I'm going to draw up to the next dart leg, and then I'm again going to put my pencil, is going to close this second dart here, put my pencil down here, and again close the other dart up here, like so, and draw in the rest of my waist. So now my darts at the waistline are closed, and they have, through the magic of magic, been opened up into the hem. I promise. So now I'm drawing in that other edge, and actually I'm going to line up that center little bit again between the darts so I can give myself a little mark down here at the hem, which of course I'm off camera. The ceilings are low in here, so I can only raise the camera above the table so high, unfortunately. But my skirts, I like to have them at 29 inches long, the patterns. So here I am with my 18-inch ruler measuring down to 29 inches for the hem here, and I'll just keep measuring down to get my correct hem. But now I've just created the A-line skirt without having to do all that cutting and taping, honestly. But yeah, my hair's long enough to be in a French braid. I don't know if I want to cut my bob back in by myself. I mean, I'm not very good at it, obviously, because cutting hair behind your own neck, it's not the easiest thing to do. Alright, so here's my bodice front in the muslin that we cut out before we started working on those back patterns. Again, I'm just going to use my awl to poke through the new dart points and dart legs here so I can transfer those side darts onto this pattern piece. And I will just do that with marker here because we're working in a mock-up muslin, so I don't have to care, which is nice. Take all the pins out of this. I will want to go ahead and mark up here where the yoke ends, I suppose, just so that I know, because it's like in the middle of this facing, where the heck that is supposed to end. In the muslin, the pieces won't stretch out too much, but in a, say, very flowy rayon crepe, for example, not that we're going to use one of those, this stuff will be moving around like nobody's business, so it's important to have a mark there to know where that yoke piece is actually supposed to end. Anyway, I'll go ahead and draw in my darts here, and this is about when I realized that I had cut the dart excess wrong. Get excited for me. What a silly goose. Alright, so up here I'm going to need to put my gathering stitching in. Down here I'm going to need to sew these darts. So we'll go ahead and pin those. I think I'm leaving this muslin mock-up in here because I do the actual dress the same way, and I think it's easier to see what's going on in the muslin than it is in the rayon crepe later, so ooh. Alright, so now I've sewn those darts, and look at me about to discover, wait a minute, what happened there? I've pressed these darts correctly, and which means there's a bit missing here because I had folded and cut the excess wrong earlier, because I folded it up and I needed to fold it down like this. Oh my goodness. So I'm going to tape some extra paper onto here and fix this nonsense. Now I can cut it off with it folded down, honestly. And because of the waist interacting with this, it creates this very funky little shape, but it all works out in the end, I promise. Because I'm cutting it at the waist there too, as you can see. So I have these little dagged edge down here, but now it is fixed, thank goodness. So now I can sew my yoke back onto the main body. So this seam here, I'm going to lay this main body piece underneath and then the small one on top. And again, this is why you want to mark where this thing is supposed to end up here, because now I know, thanks to that marking being there, where it's supposed to be. This just gets sewn on here. I'm trying to think this through. For some reason, I was finding it extra confusing thanks to these fold-on facings, just because it's something I don't normally use. I'm like, wait, am I losing my mind? Possibly. Yeah, right here. Right here. Yes, it's fine. I'm leaving in a little bit of my, extra of my thought process in this video today. I'm noticing. I have a little bit of extra footage during the sewing too of just, me thinking things through. Just so you know that it's not a completely flawless process when I'm doing this either. But I can go ahead and go and sew that seam now. And here's the resulting muslin here. I forgot to film a clip of it, so I actually just filmed this morning because I was like, I didn't show them what the muslin looked like. So here's the muslin. This is what that looks like after this bit is sewn. And then of course this little facing folds down, and then we have a finished neckline edge up here. And then also the facing, once that seam is folded in, is also finished on this side. So that's what that looks like. This little edge here, you could fold this down like so and hand stitch it down for a perfect little finish in here. I had just sewed to the raw edge of mine, so I didn't really care to. Once you'll see in the dress that I don't do anything else to it other than serge it and just leave it hanging in here. It'll be fine. Again, I'm not going to be rough and tumble on a rayon crepe dress. It'll be dry clean only anyway, so it's not going to get a lot of friction in the future. I'm not worried about mine. Something else to note here is I wouldn't use any fabric heavier than, say, a muslin. You wouldn't want to use like a corduroy or a velvet, or a cotton velvet, or a thick twill or anything like that with a design like this, because there's so much gathering up in that shoulder, it wouldn't fit in anything that was too thick, so a lighter weight fabric is going to do best. And here is my lightweight fabric of choice for today. And when I say of choice, I mean my least favorite choice. Here is the A-line skirt front and back that I'm going to cut on the fold here for the front, and then the backs I need to. And then I will lay this fabric out and cut a single layer for the fronts and the over skirty bit, like so. So this is just a single layer of fabric now, because I only need one of the yoke, one of the front, and one of the skirt drapey bit. This fabric is the same on either side also, so I don't have to think about that, which is nice. And here are the backs, which for some reason in those cutting diagrams I was kind of showing you there, you didn't see. I don't know. I don't know what happened there. It was over a week ago, and I can't even remember what the heck was going on. But here are my backs. I will go ahead and transfer my darts onto these so that I can sew them. As usual, I'm using a combination of colored pencil and tailor's chalk for this, and just carefully, very delicately, drawing these dart markings onto the back side of my fabric here. Of course, this is, again, a fabric that wants to move if you breathe near it, so you have to be very careful. Highly recommend like a lightweight cotton voile. Would be so much nicer. Or like anything up to like maybe a lightweight poplin in cotton. And then of course all varieties of floopy silks like a georgette, chiffon. Oh my god. I mean, the only thing I think worse to work with than a rayon crepe, a lightweight rayon crepe like this one, would be a silk chiffon, because that is as delicate as it gets. But there are people out there who like a challenge. I'm not usually one of them, to be honest. We all know I love using cotton sateen, which in my opinion is the easiest fabric to use, and that's why I use it all the dang time. But here I am using rayon crepe today. This one has been in my stash for a really long time. This is actually a lightweight rayon crepe from Joann's. With my back darts pinned, I can go ahead and start working on the front bodice pieces here. Of course, for this front piece I need to mark in these side darts, so I will go ahead and do that. Again, I need to make sure I mark this point up here where the facing and the yoke will meet. And again, I'm just marking a 1/2 inch in on either side of this big, huge shoulder seam, so I know where to put my gathering stitching in up there. But other than that, I'm just going to draw in my angled darts down here. And pin my darts, of course, as well. And then I can set this aside for now and take my pattern piece off of the yoke. Just take that off of here. You know me and my lots and lots of pins. I'll be using a lot of pins today. I'll warn you right now. With this fabric, it's a creepy crawly fabric. Oh, and by the way, sleeves, which I have failed to mention up until now. For the sleeves for this dress, I just used my regular sleeve block pattern, which you've seen me draft on the channel, and I think this is the same sleeve that I use in my Return of the Jedi dress, so I'll link that video here, because I think I show how to draft this sleeve in that video. I could be wrong. I'll go ahead and link that in a card up here, but this is just a 3/4 length version of my standard sleeve block sleeve, so it has these little elbow darts, which is what I'm transferring over here now. Just gonna mark these tiny, tiny little elbow darts, and then I will sew them, of course, as well. But you could put whatever kind of sleeve you want to in here. This is a set-in sleeve. People were noticing in my roundup of projects I completed in 2020 video that I don't use set-in sleeves very often. I really do love my all-in-one sleeve, you know? I actually just love I think it's very flattering, the all-in-one sleeve on me. It tends to make the shoulder look a little bit wider without the need of shoulder pads, and therefore the waist looks smaller. And in hourglassy fashion, that's always considered a good thing, I suppose. So I really like my all-in-one sleeve, and it is, of course, easier because it's not a separate step to sew. And it takes a little bit less fabric because it's not a separate piece as well. And I'm always stingy and not buying enough fabric, so all-in-one sleeves and I were BFFs. But here I'm doing a set-in sleeve today. 10 points! Here I am starting to sew my darts. These are just the back darts here. And you'll notice in this lightweight fabric, a lot of times I will start off and then I will grab these 2 threads in the back and just help coax the beginning of each dart or seam through the machine here. Of course, the feed dogs underneath the needle plate here are doing their job, but a lot of times a really lightweight fabric like this just wants to get eaten and drawn into the machine. So you'll see when I start out with this, a lot of the time I will grab those back 2 threads. But like all my darts, I'm just sewing off the edge here, sewing off the point, and then I will tie the threads here at the end of the point. Not too tight, you don't want to pull any tension on this, but just tie them off. And then I will have these threads, I'll cut them to about 1 inch long, and they'll just hang on the inside of my garment. No big deal. So again, line up my dart, and then you'll see I grab these threads back here, hold on to them, and just help everything move through the machine to start off with smoothly, you know? Like so. Okay, now I'm sewing the darts on the front piece as well. These are the angled side darts here. Again, grabbing those threads in the back. I guess that's my big tip for fabrics like this. Take your time, take deep breaths, and you know, make a mock-up so you can do it right the first time when it comes to the actual fabric, because this is the kind of fabric that is unforgiving if you make a mistake and have to tear it out and do it again. It's not the most forgiving of fabrics, that's for sure. Rayon crepe. They used to make nicer rayon crepes that were a little bit heavier weight. Not to be all like all fabric was better in the 1940s and 50s, but probably most fabric was of a better quality in the 1940s and 50s because people were being a little bit less stingy. Weirdly enough, even though of rationing and all that stuff. But the crepes we have now are just so lightweight. Like you can't breathe near them. But it's all I can get a hold of. It's as accurate as I can be. And it is this lovely dark blood red color we have going on here. Almost like you know that velvety look of a red rose? How it almost looks like it's made out of velvet and is plush in that way. That's the nice thing about crepe that I love, is that it's matte. It's not shiny at all, and it's got this great, like, almost velvety look to it, even though, of course, it is not a pile or velvet fabric. And here I am sewing the tiny little elbow darts on my sleeves as well. I have chosen green lighting today over here on the machine with my red dress because, of course, you know, it's just festive. And by festive, I mean it looks a little bit creepy and eerie, but that's okay. And it makes my skin look green, which is a very Grinch-like situation. Although I am not a very Grinch-like person, I quite like Christmas. It's just like extra glitter and extra sugar, and I love both of those things, so I'm into it. Alright, so I can go ahead and start pressing all my pieces over here on the ironing board. Again, always pressing my dart fullness towards the center back or center front, depending on if I'm working on the front to the back, or down. So here these darts, I'm pressing them down towards the waist. And I can, seeing as I corrected the darn pattern, honestly. I'm just giving the rest of this a quick little press. Mostly kind of relying on steam, and I have the iron set to a very low setting just because you can get iron shine on a fabric like this very quickly, so I was trying to be careful. I do have a piece of muslin over here that I use as a press cloth sometimes, but you know, only when I'm being very careful. Of course, as usual, I'm going to just finish my raw edges with the serger here, so I'm just going to run all these pieces through the serger to finish those raw edges. You could use a rayon seam binding if you wanted to be more couture about it. Or use French seams if you want to be really couture about it. But I'm me, so the quick way of doing these things is just to run them through the serger, and so that is what I have done. You'll notice here that my serger here does not have a blade on it, so I have to be quite careful on doing this to make sure I'm just riding right along the edge, because the blade on this serger broke a long time ago and has just never been fixed because it would cost nearly the same price as the serger to have apparently it fixed. They said it was unfixable. I could take it to a different shop, but I don't mind the fact that it doesn't have a blade. As we know, I'm only ever using this for raw edge encasing like this as opposed to using it to actually make garments. Maybe I eventually will learn to make knitwear and like learn how to use knits, but it is not this day, let's be honest. So now that my yoke piece and my front piece are both prepped and the darts are sewn in the front, I can go ahead and sew this section on here. And now you can see why I said it was easier to see what I was doing in the muslin, because look at this fabric. You can see me a lot of times when I'm using a delicate fabric like this, I sort of tap or pat the fabric, and that's just so that it will hopefully fall into the grain line that it's supposed to be and stop stretching out. I don't know, I feel like it helps. So sometimes you'll see me like gently pat the fabric, which is a very funny thing to watch actually. I end up on the yoke piece folding the facing down and giving it a quick press just so I can really see where that line is supposed to be, that finished edge, when I'm pinning it on here. Again, this is why I have a pin you can see marking where this piece is supposed to end and supposed to land, because in this fabric it would quickly pull out of shape. So I'll go ahead and pin this on and just sew it with my regular 1/2 inch seam allowance. Here you can see me padding along the fabric there, just so that this fits. It's supposed to fit, and I know it should, so if it's one side seems bigger than the other, it's only because the fabric's stretching out of shape, and I need to just tap it into submission, and then of course use a lot of pins. I'm using a lot of pins today because I always use a lot of pins, which you know about me, but also because this fabric is extra screwy and it wants to run away, you know? But here I am, starting at the top of the V neckline here, and I'm just going to go ahead and sew that yoke back onto the main body of the bodice. I do actually have another color of this same exact rayon crepe from Joann's in my stash still, but after working with this one I don't particularly want to make anything out of it. I know I will eventually, but because I mean this fabric is very comfortable to wear, but to use it's just a pain in the arse. But I had bought the green and the red a little while ago, back when I was still shopping at Joann's, so I still have some more of this in my stash, but we'll see. I do want to do a lot of stash busting next year, so we'll see if I ever get to using that green version of this crepe. Alright, so now that this is sewn here on the inside, I'm trying to make some decisions on how I want to finish everything down. I have both the facings. I can fold them into place to have that folded finished edge. And I'm just going to go ahead and press that real fast here, a little bit. So I have my V neckline finished. And again, you could turn this little side here underneath if you wanted to. I'm just going to leave it hanging in here, but I am going to go ahead and stitch this seam allowance down, top stitch it from the outside, and I'm going to stitch it down facing towards the main body of this. So I'm going to give this a quick little press so that the seam allowance just faces the main body of the rest of this garment. Normally I would top stitch seam allowance up into the yoke area, but because the rest of this was going to have so much gathering going on, I didn't think it would be noticeable if I did it down. So here I am, top stitching from the outside here, top stitching that, or edge stitching down that seam allowance to the main body of the piece. Hopefully you get what I'm saying. Honestly, I feel like I'm being very confusing today, but I always say that, so maybe I'm just always confusing and that's my trademark. Oh. Alright, now that my yoke is on, top stitch, etc., I can go ahead and put my gathering stitching into this other shoulder seam so I can gather it down to size. So it starts to look like a bodice again. So I'll put my 2 lines of gathering stitching up along here, just trying to get those within the seam allowance. So I have 2 lines of the biggest stitch length on my machine. Of course I don't back tack that so that I can go ahead and then pull it down like so. Again, this is why you want to use a thin fabric, because this is a lot of stuff to gather down to, you know, the width of the normal shoulder seam. So this will all barely fit even in this very thin rayon crepe, let alone you could never make this out of like a regular weight cotton sateen. If you had a very lightweight cotton sateen, which they do exist, but you wouldn't want to use a thicker fabric for this because you gotta fit all these gathers down in here. And this is where I'm about to use 8 billion pins. So I'll warn you in advance now and again when we get there. But just gathering that shoulder down, and then I grab one of the back pieces and I notice that I need to go ahead and face my back pieces before I sew them here at the shoulder, because there's the, of course, self-facing on this front piece, but there's no facing on the back right now to sew it to. So I will go ahead and face the back neckline of these before I sew them at the shoulder. Now again, I didn't mention making a back facing pattern, but I assume you've seen me make a facing pattern before. Really, you just trace the top, or like the neckline, you trace along the neckline 2.5 inches to create these little facings, little tiny bits of fabric. And you'll notice I always serge the outside edges of these, but never this actual neckline edge because it's going to be turned in on itself and not a problem. So I'll go ahead and pin these on and stitch them down so that the back pieces can be faced before we attach them to the front, because the front is self-faced and therefore the facings are included. This Singer 99K, still the best investment here in the sewing room of the year. Now that those are sewn on, I can go ahead and clip this curve, of course very gently and carefully. You don't want to clip through that seam, but you do want to clip right up next to it. Luckily this isn't an area that gets a ton of stress, so, you know. But you must clip your curves if you want them to lie smoothly. Let me tell you, if you tried to iron this without clipping that, you would notice. It wouldn't work very well. But I am going to go ahead and put some understitching in here as well. So I'm going to stitch that seam allowance down to the facing side. So just throwing some understitching in here as well. I do wonder sometimes if I should just make very specific small tutorials like how to understitch and do it like a very slow explanation of what this is. But like those tutorials do exist on YouTube already, and they're done in a much more professional manner than I feel like I could do. Like individual technique tutorials. I feel like there are other people out there who do it better than I could, with like really epic setups and good lighting and all that jazz. I kind of accidentally teach sewing while I'm trying to explain pattern drafting in some ways. But now that I have my back pieces faced, I can go ahead and pin them at the shoulders to my front pieces. So here I am doing that. Alright, here is where we're about to use 8 billion of these little ultrafine glass-headed pins, because in this gathering, I want to space out the gathering so it's even all across the shoulder. And I want to make sure that every little bit of this gathering that wants to stick out and stick down into the seam on either the front in between these layers or on the back is pinned into submission. So I'm about to use 8 billion pins, and I will sew over them. Now, please take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. Now again, remember, I have a blood pact with the machine. There has been a magic ritual, a full, situation with, sacrifices and spells, so that my machine just doesn't hit pins. Now, not everyone has this kind of a sorceress relationship with their machine, and I am sorry if that is the case, but luckily for me, we just have an understanding. And again, I've promised it my firstborn, even though I don't plan on having children. So it works for me. It may not work for everyone. I go slow. I watch what's happening as I go. But yes, this is 8 bajillion pins that I'm about to stitch over. Please close your eyes now. This is not suitable for children, But here I am sewing my one normal shoulder seam, and then I will sew the other one over all of that gathering. Alright lads, here we go. Here we go. Again, although this footage is sped up, I am taking my time and going quite slowly. You can see I have my hand in between the layers here, just again to try and make sure I'm not catching these gathers in any sort of weird folded way. And I'm just slowly stitching over all of this metal. You're welcome. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm not sorry at all, actually, am I? No, I'm not. It's all a lie. I sew over my pins. Y'all know this. I'm actually going to go ahead and take all those pins out and sew over this area again from the top like this, just to have an extra line of thread in here, because it's a lot of gathering in a lightweight fabric on this little one stressed seam. So I just wanted to put an extra line of stitching in here to help support all this nonsense. Okay, back over here on the ironing board, I can go ahead and press my shoulder seams. For this gathered side, I just pressed all the seam allowance towards the back, as opposed to pressing it open, just because I have all that gathering going on there. But I can now go ahead and pin the facing down to the shoulder seam just to hold it down there. I'll eventually tack that, you'll see that later. But I can also go ahead and pin my side seams on this. So I'll go ahead and do that now. So I can sew the side seams of this bodice as well. Again, the other side here, I have the facing pinned down, and I have the side seam pinned, so I can bring them over to the machine here and sew my side seams. Just normal half-inch seam allowance as usual. And over my pins, again, as usual. And just pressing those side seams open here, over on the ironing board. Like so, gently, carefully, in this lightweight fabric that wants to get crispified. And then, my neckline is finished, my shoulder is gathered, the bodice is mostly together, and it's time to put in some sleeves. So I will grab my sleeves that are sitting just over here and sew the underarm seam on these. Go ahead and lay these flat, pin the side seams of those, or underarm seam. You can see I've got a little bit of iron shine on this dart already. Gotta be really careful with a fabric like this. You look at it funny and it knows. Go ahead and pin that seam and stitch that seam over here. And then I went ahead and ironed that seam open. And then for the hem on these sleeves, I'm just going to turn it twice, like 1/4 of an inch twice, and actually stitch it down by machine. Normally I would probably hand hem something like this, but I just felt in this fabric that the stitches were disappearing quite well, and that it could handle having it be done by machine, or like no one would notice the difference, and it would take less time. Again, you know, sometimes I do handwork and sometimes I don't. And then I have to come back here and voice over and explain why. And I don't really know the reason why. But I'm going to go ahead and turn this twice, pin it down, and stitch it by machine. I'm just going to leave this in real time so you can see me maneuvering this little cuff around on this machine where I can't, you know, like some machines have a bit you can take off so that you can fit a cuff around it. On this machine I cannot. I just wanted to leave this in here and show you how I maneuver around this edge, just carefully readjusting every, you know, inch or so to get around the edge of my cuff, making sure that nothing's getting caught underneath that I don't want to get caught underneath, making sure I remove my pins as I go, and then just stitching really close to that folded edge from the inside of the sleeve here. So my bobbin thread, I guess, is what's going to show on the outside, but I don't really care. The thread is the same color. No one will know. But this is just how I ended up doing these cuffs. If you could call them cuffs. It's more just the sleeve hem, as it were. Back stitch at the end, come off the machine, and my sleeve is hemmed, or one of them is, at least. Like so, on the outside. Looks nice enough for me. Anyway, so now that my sleeves are hemmed, I can go ahead and put a line of gathering stitching along the top of my sleeve caps. I just do this like on the 5 inches centermost of this sleeve, and that just helps when you set in your sleeves to have a little bit of gathering in the very top of the cap. These sleeves aren't a puff sleeve, they have no gathering in the design, but having a tiny little bit of gathering in the top of a sleeve just helps them ease in and fit into the top of the garment well. You know, I guess I don't talk about this kind of thing often enough because I don't do a lot of set-in sleeves, but usually there's a bit of sleeve ease built into the sleeve cap, and that gets gathered down but ends up looking smooth. So hopefully that makes some sense. If you've ever done a set-in sleeve before, they've probably recommended that you put gathering in the top, so you probably know what I'm talking about. But here I am. I will go ahead and just a pin in my center, pin in the center of my sleeve, and I will match up with the shoulder seam here, like so. And then I will pin my sleeve into the armhole, and then I can stitch it in. Alright, with my sleeves in, my bodice is essentially done and ready to be sewn onto the skirt. So I should start working on the skirt here. So I have my A-line skirt and then extra panel, basically, is what's going on here. So I have two fronts. I have the regular A-line skirt front, which is the kind of underskirt of this, and then I have the overskirt drape thing that goes on top of it, that big wide piece we drafted at the start. So here I'm just taking my pins out of my pieces, and I will set my skirt pieces next to my serger here, so I can serge the waistline and then the long side seams. I won't serge the hem just because I will be finishing that in a different way. But here for this piece, this straight across angled edge hangs freely on the top of the skirt, and so I don't want to serge the edge of that. I want to just go ahead and turn it twice and finish it nicely, because it will turn and move while I'm walking and while I'm wearing the dress, and will be seen. Each side will be seen, the back side and the front. So I want it to be nice on both sides, so I will go ahead and iron this and turn it twice up at the top and then again down here along these two straight edges. So here I am pressing that down about 3/8 of an inch and then 3/8 of an inch again, like so. And I'll just pin that and stitch it. And then again for the other straight edge here, again we'll just turn it, again about 3/8 of an inch. This ended up more like 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch really. I wasn't being very precise. You can be more precise than me. I believe in you. I would argue that probably a lot of people who watch my videos sew a lot better than me, or are much more patient and make much nicer finished garments than I do, because we all know I'm an impatient being. Alright, so now that I have that one edge finished, I can go ahead and serge the rest of my edges. So that is what I'm going to do over here now. Alright, everything all serged on this front extra drapey bit, the overskirt of the front. I will go ahead and put my gathering in up here. I'm just gathering from the center front of this to the side. Putting some gathering stitching in here. 2 lines, of course. And again, even though it starts to gather a little bit, so putting in the second line of stitching is a pain. Makes me miss cotton. You know, I do love rayon, but it's a love-hate relationship. I hate to love it, and I love it, and I hate that I love it. You know what I'm saying? Something like that. Anyway, I'll gather this. I have it pinned along the waist here, as far as it's straight off, and then I will gather the rest of this down so that it ends about 3 inches before the side seam. You can see on the pattern illustration here in just a moment on the screen. There we go. It kind of ends before that side seam, and it looked about, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches to me. So I wanted this to finish around here, so I'm just going to pin that down again with a bajillion pins over that gathering, just so nothing gets caught or funky. And then I will go ahead and stitch this down along the top edge of this and just baste it into place, because this eventually will get stitched down when it gets sewn to, like the waist seam gets sewn to the bodice. But I'd rather have a line of basting in here too, just so that I don't have to have a bunch of pins when it comes to sewing this to the bodice later. But here I am, straightening out those gathers with a bajillion pins once again. And alas, I will sew over them once again. And no needles, no machines, and no people were hurt in this process. People are always telling me it's deadly dangerous, but again, those people don't know about my magical pact with the machine. All you have to do is a little wizardry, and you'll be fine. I am kidding, by the way, but also not, apparently, because it does work for me, so some sort of magic is taking place. I'm just not sure what kind. Okay, so now that I have the waistline of the two fronts basted together, I want to go ahead and sew the side seam here. You could baste this, the two fronts together along here before you then sew the back piece onto it at the side seam, but I'm just going to lay one of the back skirts on here and sew all 3 layers together at once. So of course there's 2 layers for the front, and then the back gets laid on top of that, and so the overskirt kind of gets sandwiched in between the back and the front. And you can see here along the bias, when I was sewing this, that the needle kept pulling my crepe, but it was fine. It all straightened out again once it got pressed, so no big deal. Here I am pressing that 3-layer situation I was talking about, and you can see at the last about 1.5 inches of this, I did not stitch because I wanted to leave the fronts free hanging, or the front and the back free hanging down here by the hem, so I could hem everything individually, because I didn't want to hem both fronts together. I wanted to hem each front on its own, so I left the last about 2 inches of this seam open for that reason and for that purpose. Not that at this point I was looking forward to hemming all this. But I pinned and sewed the other side seam of the skirt together, so the other back is on there, so the skirt is all together, the bodice is all together, and I can sew them to one another at the waist seam. So here I am lining up the side seams, right sides together, bodice on top of the skirt here, and then I will just pin the bodice and skirt together, and I will sew them together. Again, as I always tend to say, you could put a waist tape in here, you could put some sort of interfacing, or extra layer, or extra security, but alas, I've never had a skirt and bodice come apart on me, so I just stitched them together. Back on the ironing board, I'm just pressing that waist seam open here, like so. And now normally this is where I would go ahead and sew the center back seam shut, baste the area along the zipper, and then sew the rest of it shut. But it's such a delicate fabric, I can't do my normal way of doing a lap zipper, which is to sew everything shut, press it, and then pull the threads back out, because this fabric can't handle the stress of doing it that way. So I will just have to actually measure and press each side of this properly without having sewn it together. So I'm just going to press each side of this center back opening down the 5/8 of an inch, and then I will do my lap zipper similar to how I normally do, just skipping that part where I usually baste the center back together closed. I can't do that in this lightweight fabric, so I'll just have to measure and iron properly. What a hassle. I can't do my cheating method this time. I have to do it properly. So I'm turning this back edge in 5/8 of an inch, which is my seam allowance for my zipper back here in this particular pattern. And I'm just measuring as I go along, and I will press this nice and flat, and then I will lay it along my zipper teeth. This is going to be the right hand side of the back of my dress eventually, and is going to be stitched along the right hand side of my zipper teeth. This is the side that gets hidden under the lap of the lapped zipper. You will see all of this in the fullness of time. So I'm just pinning that folded edge, nicely pressed edge, along the zipper teeth here, and I will sew it right next to the zipper teeth. I did switch over to a zipper foot here over on my machine for that, just so I can get real close. And just stitch that folded edge down to the zipper teeth like so, using the edge of the zipper teeth as a guide against this presser foot, which works quite well, luckily. When I first got this machine, of course, I didn't have a zipper foot for it, but I'm sure glad I have one now. Just a little bit of back stitching at the start there, and then all the way along, stopping as I go to remove the pins. because in this case I have them going parallel with the zipper, and therefore I cannot stitch over them. But just carefully zhuzhing the fabric as I go along, so it will lay flat next to those zipper teeth, and then eventually this whole area will be covered by the lapped side of this anyway. Alright, so now I can take the other folded edge back here and lap it over to cover my zipper and that other line of stitching I just did, like I would normally, except for, of course, as you can see, since I'm holding it from where it is still open, my back seam is not sewn for the rest of this yet, so I'll have to sew that after. So I'm just going to pin my zipper, or pin my dress shut over the zipper back here, lining up the waist, lining up the top, trying to make sure that everything is aligned properly. But just using these ultra-fine pins, and they are perpendicular to the zipper this time, so I will stitch over them. Again, if you want to go slow and take the pins out as you go, that would be good of you. I'm not a good witch. I'm a bad witch, and you know, I'm a bad stitch witch, and I don't mind telling you. Again, I'm just using the zipper foot pressed up against the zipper teeth underneath so I can feel where the zipper teeth are, even though I cannot see them. This does sound more like witchcraft the more I talk about it. Dang it. Again, leave the needle down and position the end of the zipper out of the way. You've seen me do this before in a much slower and more educational fashion. Alright, now my zipper is in. Hooray! That is always good. So now I need to fold my facings down along the inside of the neckline up there and stitch those down by hand. I'll show you that in a minute. And then of course I need to sew my back seam still as well from the zipper down, because alas, it is still open here. So I'm going to sew this seam close to where the zipper ends, but not all the way up to where the zipper is, because I want to finish that last little bit by slip stitching it shut myself afterwards, just to make sure that nothing wonkadoodle happens up there. Because it's very easy to go wayward. So I'm going to sew this back seam up near the zipper, but about an inch, inch and a half out, so that I don't accidentally catch anything weird up there or do anything strange. I'll just finish it by hand for the last inch and a half up there. So up here, I'm not going to stitch this last inch or so, but for the rest of it down to the hem, I can go ahead and stitch it on the machine. Alright, so I can go ahead and press that seam open. I still have that little bit open right at the end of the zipper, and I'll just slip stitch that shut by hand. But here I am folding the back facings down underneath along the zipper tape here, just pinning that in place. And then I can go ahead and hand stitch that down along the inside there, and then tack it up at the shoulder seam there as well, where it's pinned. On this side again too, you can see it's pinned at the shoulder seam, and I just need to fold this area underneath, pin it down, and actually just fell these down on the inside along the zipper tape, which again, you'll see momentarily. Press that into submission. I just need to stitch here and here. So over in front of my computer with some cranberry juice. Me and my cranberry juice. We're BFFs. I'm just tacking it with a couple of messy loose stitches, tacking the facing to the seam allowance over here, so no stitches show on the outside. I'm just sewing the facing to the seam allowance itself, so that my facing just stays tucked under where it is supposed to be, honestly. There I am catching a bunch of extra fabric. Blech. There we go. And I'm just going to tie this thread off up here, like so. And then I will go ahead and fell down this little area here. I'm just coming out from inside so that my little knot at the end of my thread doesn't show. Again, in true couture, I don't think you put a knot at the end of your thread. You're supposed to do like small tiny stitches, back stitches, where your thread gets secured without a knot. But again, I am not a couturier, sadly enough. But here I'm just felling down this little edge to the zipper tape so it stays nice and smooth in here. And then I will stitch the facing to itself, this little flappy bits, so that they don't flap around. So these stitches I'm putting in here right now are just between those two layers of facing to hold it flat. Those stitches are not on the outside of the garment at all, see? So, and I will tie this off as well, just so that the flaps stop flapping. Keep your flaps inside the dress at all times. Alright, this side again, just tack this down, then tack down the other side of the facing again. I actually usually backstitch the other side down as opposed to felling it. Who knows? I'm a strange being, you know? Again, as we know. Alright, so now that the facing is stitched down, I can go ahead and stitch a tiny hook and eye here at the top as well. I just kind of position this wherever it needs to be to make the dress lie flat. Every dress is different, honestly. So in this case, I'm just stitching on a tiny little black hook and eye here. And then for hemming this dress, I did actually let this dress hang overnight and then try it on the next day and have my mom pin where the hem dipped down and was weird. The way she did that was measure up from the floor. So I was wearing the dress and like standing up straight. And then I had my mom, my assistant in this case, pin up like 14 inches from the floor all around the hem. So wherever it dipped down below 14 inches, I could go ahead and cut off and straighten off this hem. I'm sure this hem is still not perfect just because this, again, is a very floopy fabric. Blech. So, you know, it likes to stretch out of shape, again, if you blink in its general direction. So I'm sure it's not perfect, but it is serviceable. So that's all I can really ask for. And the way I ended up hemming this dress, because this is a A-line skirt, therefore the hem is curved. Normally I would use bias to finish something like this, but in a lightweight fabric like this, I didn't want to have to use like rayon seam binding or like a lightweight bias of any kind. So I just wanted to go ahead and turn this up twice and do a very narrow little twice turned hem. So I'm turning this again just under like maybe 1/4 of an inch twice and doing like I guess a thick rolled hem almost. And I'm actually almost like felling this down as opposed to slip stitching it, which is how I normally do hems, but just taking these little stitches every 1/4 of an inch maybe, and I just hemmed the whole thing this way, just pinching it, turned twice, and pinning it as I went, and stitching it down. Ooh. And I just hemmed the front drape this way, the front underskirt layer this way, and the back all at once. And hand stitching this hem probably took me, I want to say like 4 or 5 hours. Here you can see I'm pinning it to my mouse pad as almost like a way to secure this as I went along. And you can see I'm just kind of felling this down. This little, well, not a very little rolled hem, it's kind of thicker rolled hem. And I just went all the way along in this same way. It is not like the smoothest or prettiest hem finish ever. You can barely see it here though. But it's consistent. And that is what is almost more important in this, is that it's hemmed the same way all around. So you can see I'm just grabbing a little bite of both the underlayer and the fold as I go along. I think this is considered felling. Yeah, you can let me know. You can correct me below. But that was the last step for this dress. Here is my finished red rayon crepe dress, all done, all completed, and it is actually quite comfortable despite how irritating I find working with these fabrics. They are very nice to wear. Thank you again to my patrons for allowing me to share this video with everyone over here on the channel, and thank you for supporting me on Patreon in general, because I could not continue to do what I do without your support. I hope you enjoyed seeing how this project came together today, and thank you as always for watching. I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!